Wildflowers in Copper Valley, a Western romance by Carl Watson. The first golden rays of morning light stretched across Copper Valley, casting long shadows through the pines that surrounded the small settlement. Margaret Hayes stood on the porch of her newly inherited cabin, taking in the vast expanse before her. 2 weeks had passed since she'd arrived from Philadelphia, and still, the immensity of the Western Territory left her breathless. "You'll get used to it," a deep voice called from nearby. Margaret turned to see Samuel Burke leading his horse toward the water trough beside her property. His broad shoulders and tall frame cut an imposing figure against the clear blue sky. Since her arrival, he'd been a constant presence, sometimes welcome, sometimes not. "I wonder if that's true, Mr. Burke," she replied, smoothing her simple blue dress. "Some things seem too grand to ever become commonplace." Samuel smiled, the corners of his eyes squinting. At 32, his face already showed the weathering of a man who'd spent his life outdoors, but there was a gentleness in his expression that belied his rugged appearance. "Call me Samuel, please. We're neighbors now, after all." Margaret nodded, though propriety argued against such familiarity. "Very well, Samuel, though I'm not certain how long I'll remain your neighbor. My uncle's legacy wasn't what I expected." "Most things out here aren't what folks expect," he said, his voice carrying a hint of amusement. "That's the beauty of the West." Margaret had come to claim her late uncle's property, a small cabin and the surrounding land. She'd anticipated selling it quickly and returning east with enough money to establish herself comfortably, perhaps open the small bookshop she'd always dreamed of. What she hadn't expected was to find the property in disrepair, with taxes owed and boundaries disputed. "Beauty is subjective, Mr. Burke, Samuel," she corrected herself, "and at present, I find myself questioning the appeal." Samuel finished watering his horse and leaned against the fence post. "You're wondering if you made a mistake coming here." It wasn't a question, and Margaret didn't bother denying it. "I had different expectations." "The West isn't kind to expectations," Samuel said, "but it rewards determination. Your uncle spoke of you often, said you had more spine than most men he knew." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "You knew my uncle well?" "As well as anyone could know Geoffrey Hayes. He was a private man, but fair. We worked cattle together for 3 seasons." This was new information. Her uncle's letters had been sparse with details about his life. She'd known him as a distant relative who occasionally sent gifts for Christmas and her birthday, exotic trinkets from a world she couldn't imagine. "I didn't realize that he had friends." Samuel's laugh was warm. "Even the most solitary souls find connections out here. Survival depends on it." The sound of approaching hoofbeats interrupted their conversation. A rider approached at a leisurely pace, his expression darkening as he spotted Samuel. "Burke," the man acknowledged coldly before turning to Margaret with an appreciative glance. "And you must be Hayes' niece. Walter Dunne, at your service." Samuel's posture stiffened. "What brings you this way, Dunne? Your ranch is on the other side of town." Walter Dunne was a man of medium height with expensive clothes that seemed at odds with the frontier setting. His smile didn't reach his eyes as he tipped his hat to Margaret. "I came to welcome Miss Hayes to Copper Valley. Word travels fast in small towns," he explained, "and to discuss a business proposition." "I wasn't aware we had business to discuss, Mr. Dunne," Margaret replied. "Your uncle's property borders my northwestern pasture. I've been interested in acquiring it for some time. I'd be willing to offer you a fair price, enough to return east in comfort." Samuel's jaw tightened. "Interesting timing, Dunne. The lady's barely settled in." "Simply being neighborly," Dunne replied smoothly. "Unlike some, I understand Miss Hayes might not wish to remain in this rustic setting indefinitely." Margaret sensed the tension between the men. "While I appreciate your interest, Mr. Dunne, I'm not prepared to make decisions about the property just yet." Dunne's smile remained fixed. "Of course, take your time to consider. Though I should mention that property with outstanding taxes can be claimed at auction if those taxes remain unpaid." The thinly veiled threat wasn't lost on Margaret. "Thank you for the information, Mr. Dunne. I'm aware of my obligations." After Dunne departed, Samuel's expression was troubled. "Be careful with him, Margaret. Walter Dunne has been trying to expand his holdings for years, and he doesn't always play fair." "Are you suggesting he's dangerous?" "I'm suggesting he's ambitious," Samuel replied. "And ambition can make men do things they might otherwise not consider." Margaret sighed, looking out at the land that stretched before her. The problem of the unpaid taxes weighed heavily. I suppose I need to find work while I sort through this situation. As it happens, Samuel said, the general store is looking for help. Mrs. Fairfield's daughter just married and moved to Denver. A shop girl? Margaret couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. In Philadelphia, she'd been a governess for a wealthy family, a position of some respect. Samuel seemed to read her thoughts. Out here, honest work is honest work. No one looks down on those who contribute to the community. Margaret nodded slowly. You're right, of course. Pride is a luxury I can ill afford at present. I wouldn't call it pride, Samuel said. Just Eastern thinking. You'll adjust. The next morning found Margaret at Fairfield's general store, learning the inventory and the customers' preferences. Clara Fairfield was a widow in her 50s with a sharp mind for business and a kind heart. You're a quick study, Clara remarked as Margaret correctly tallied a complicated order without hesitation. Most newcomers take longer to learn our system. I've always been good with numbers, Margaret replied. My father insisted his daughters be educated properly, even if society didn't see the value in it. Clara nodded approvingly. A forward-thinking man. You'll find the West offers more freedom for women than you might be accustomed to. Necessity breaks down many social barriers. Over the next few weeks, Margaret fell into a rhythm. Mornings at the store, afternoons spent repairing her uncle's cabin and sorting through his belongings. Samuel often appeared with tools or advice, staying to help with the heavier tasks. One evening, as they sat on her porch watching the setting sun paint the sky in brilliant colors, Samuel broached a subject she'd been avoiding. Have you considered Dunne's offer? He asked. Margaret took a sip of tea before answering. I've thought about it. The amount would solve my immediate problems. But something tells me the property is worth more than he's offering, she admitted, and I can't shake the feeling that my uncle wouldn't want me to sell to him specifically. Samuel nodded slowly. Jeff was protective of this land. Did you know there's a freshwater spring on the northern edge? It feeds several smaller creeks that run through neighboring properties. Margaret shook her head. I had no idea. Water rights are precious out here. If Dunne controlled that spring, he'd control the surrounding ranches as well, Margaret finished, understanding dawning. Including yours? Samuel nodded. Mine and several others. We've had an informal agreement for years. Everyone has fair access. Dunne would change that. Why didn't you tell me this before? Wasn't my place, Samuel said simply. It's your property to do with as you wish. I won't influence you out of self-interest. Margaret studied him in the fading light. His integrity moved her, especially compared to Dunne's thinly veiled threats. Thank you for your honesty, she said softly. It seems I have more to consider than I realized. As weeks turned to months, Margaret found herself adapting to life in Copper Valley. The work at the store provided enough income to begin paying down her uncle's debts. The physical labor of maintaining her property strengthened her body, while the challenges strengthened her resolve. And Samuel became a constant in her life. He taught her to ride properly, to identify edible plants, to negotiate with the occasional travelers who passed through. Their friendship deepened, though both carefully maintained the boundaries of propriety, until the night of the harvest dance. Clara had insisted Margaret attend, even lending her a dress for the occasion, a simple but elegant creation in deep blue that complemented her auburn hair. The town hall was transformed with lanterns and wildflowers, a local string band providing lively music. When Samuel spotted her, his expression changed in a way that made her breath catch. He crossed the room without hesitation. May I have this dance, Miss Hayes? He asked formally, though his eyes held a warmth that was anything but formal. You may, Mr. Burke, she replied, placing her hand in his. As he led her onto the floor, she was acutely aware of his hand at her waist, strong and steady. They moved together as if they'd danced 100 times before, conversation flowing easily between them. You look beautiful tonight, he said, his voice low. Though I must say, I'm equally impressed by how you handled old Jenkins' broken fence last week. Not many ladies would wade into mud to help rescue stray calves. Margaret laughed. Not many ladies would have the opportunity. I find I rather enjoy being useful. Is that why you've stopped talking about returning east? Samuel asked, his tone casual though his eyes were intent. The question caught her off guard. Had she stopped mentioning Philadelphia? Thinking about it, She realized it had been weeks since she'd voiced any plans to leave. "I suppose I've been preoccupied with present concerns," she said carefully. Samuel's hand tightened slightly at her waist. "Only that?" Before she could answer, Walter Dunne appeared beside them, his smile tight. "May I cut in?" he asked, though it wasn't really a question as he inserted himself between them. Samuel stepped back reluctantly, his eyes meeting Margaret's briefly before he moved away. Dunne was a competent dancer, but his touch made Margaret uncomfortable in a way Samuel's never did. "You've become quite the local fixture, Miss Hayes," Dunne remarked. "Not what I expected when you first arrived." "Life often takes unexpected turns, Mr. Dunne." "Indeed. Speaking of which, the county tax auction is approaching. I noticed your uncle's property is still on the delinquent list." His tone was conversational, but the implication was clear. Margaret kept her expression neutral. "Thank you for your concern, but my arrangements with the tax collector are private." Dunne's smile faltered slightly. "Of course. I merely thought to save you embarrassment. Small towns can be unforgiving of financial difficulties." "I found quite the opposite," Margaret replied. "The people of Copper Valley have shown me nothing but kindness." "Some more than others," Dunne said, glancing meaningfully toward Samuel, who stood watching them from across the room. "I should warn you that Burke has his own interests at heart. Your property's water access would greatly benefit his struggling ranch." Margaret met his gaze directly. "Mr. Burke has never once pressured me regarding my property. Can you say the same, Mr. Dunne?" The music ended, and Margaret stepped away. "Thank you for the dance, if you'll excuse me." She made her way through the crowd, nodding at acquaintances who had become friends. When Samuel appeared at her side with a cup of punch, she accepted it gratefully. "Dunne seemed to have plenty to say," he remarked. Margaret sipped her punch before answering. "He was kind enough to remind me of the upcoming tax auction and imply that you have designs on my property." Samuel's expression hardened. "That man has made me realize something important," Margaret interrupted. "I've been so focused on whether to stay or go that I haven't properly considered who I trust and why." Samuel studied her face carefully. "And have you reached any conclusions?" "I believe I have," she said softly. "Would you walk me home, Samuel? I'd like to discuss something with you." The night air was cool as they strolled through town toward her cabin. Stars blanketed the sky, more brilliant than Margaret had ever seen in Philadelphia. "Your uncle used to say that out here we're closer to heaven," Samuel commented, following her gaze upward. "I'm beginning to understand what he meant," Margaret replied. She paused at her gate, turning to face Samuel. "I've made a decision about the property." Samuel waited, his expression carefully neutral. "I'm not selling to Dunne," she stated firmly. "In fact, I'm not selling at all. I'm staying." The relief in Samuel's eyes was palpable, though he only nodded. "May I ask what changed your mind?" Margaret smiled. "Many things. The work suits me. The community has welcomed me. And," she hesitated, gathering her courage, "there are connections here I'm not willing to abandon." Samuel stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "Margaret, I need to be clear about something. I don't care about the water rights or the property. If you sold to Dunne tomorrow, it wouldn't change how I feel about you." "And how do you feel?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. In answer, Samuel reached out slowly, giving her time to step away if she wished. When she remained still, he gently touched her cheek, his calloused fingers surprisingly soft against her skin. "I feel that meeting you has been the greatest fortune of my life," he said simply. "I feel that your courage and determination are matched only by your kindness. And I feel that if you gave me permission, I would very much like to court you properly." Margaret's heart raced as she covered his hand with her own. "I believe I would like that very much, Samuel Burke." The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. Slowly, respectfully, he leaned forward to press his lips to hers in a gentle kiss that promised more to come. When they parted, Margaret felt as though something fundamental had shifted within her, as if the vast western sky had somehow made its way into her soul, expanding her vision of what her life could be. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," Samuel said, taking her hand in his, "we face whatever comes together. Starting with those taxes." The following week brought an unexpected discovery. While cleaning her uncle's desk, Margaret found a hidden compartment containing a leather pouch. Inside was a substantial amount of cash and a note in her uncle's handwriting. For Margaret, who always dreamed beyond boundaries. The money was more than enough to clear the tax debt, with plenty remaining to properly repair the cabin and make improvements to the land. When Samuel saw it, he laughed with genuine delight. "That sounds exactly like something Jeff would do," he said. He was always 3 steps ahead of everyone else. With the tax issue resolved, Dunne's leverage disappeared. When he came calling again with another offer, Margaret firmly declined. "This land isn't for sale, Mr. Dunne," she stated. "Not now, not ever." His pleasant front cracked momentarily. "You're making a mistake, Miss Hayes. A woman alone can't manage property in this territory." "She's not alone," Samuel said, stepping onto the porch beside her. "And I'd appreciate if you'd remember that in future conversations." After Dunne left, Margaret turned to Samuel with a raised eyebrow. "That was rather presumptuous of you." Samuel had the grace to look abashed. "I apologize. I shouldn't have spoken for you." "No," she agreed, "you shouldn't have. However," she reached for his hand, "I appreciate the sentiment behind it." As summer turned to fall, Samuel and Margaret's courtship progressed with the blessing of the community. Clara Fairfield promoted Margaret to partner in the store, giving her greater security and a stake in the town's future. Together, they worked to improve both their properties. Samuel's knowledge of cattle ranching complemented Margaret's head for business. They began making plans that intertwined their futures as surely as their hearts had already joined. On a crisp October evening, as they sat by the creek that connected their lands, Samuel presented Margaret with a simple gold band. "I'm not a man of fancy words," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "But I know what I want, and that's a life with you. Will you marry me, Margaret Hayes?" Margaret looked at the man before her, honest, hard-working, kind, and at the land around them that had become her home in ways Philadelphia never had been. "Yes," she said, joy bubbling up inside her like the spring that fed their creek. "Yes, I will marry you, Samuel." They were wed in the town church as autumn's colors painted the surrounding hills. Margaret wore a cream-colored dress that Clara had helped her make, with wildflowers woven into her hair. As they spoke their vows, Margaret thought of the journey that had brought her here, from reluctant inheritor to committed settler, from independent newcomer to a woman deeply connected to both a man and a community. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Samuel kissed her with a promise of all that was to come. The gathered townspeople cheered, celebrating not just a union of 2 people, but the strengthening of their community. Later, at the celebration at Clara's home, Walter Dunne made an appearance. To everyone's surprise, he approached the couple with what appeared to be genuine congratulations. "It seems I misjudged the situation," he admitted, shaking Samuel's hand. "The West makes for unlikely success stories." Margaret studied him, still wary of his intentions. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Dunne." "I'll be moving on," he informed them. "Bought land further south. Copper Valley has become too restrictive for my ambitions." After he left, Samuel squeezed Margaret's hand. The community won out. "Is that what happened?" she asked. "Out here, the land shapes us as much as we shape it," Samuel replied. "Those who fight against that truth eventually move on. Those who embrace it find more than they ever expected," Margaret finished, thinking of all she had gained since stepping off the stagecoach months ago. As they danced under a lantern light, surrounded by friends who had become family, Margaret knew with absolute certainty that she had found her place in the world, not in the drawing rooms of Philadelphia but here in the wide open spaces of the West, with a man who saw her strength as clearly as he saw her beauty. In Copper Valley, with Samuel Burke, Margaret Hayes had found not just love but a future as vast and promising as the western sky above them.